Hey, everybody. Just a quick reminder about these masterclass series with our guest is that, well, first and foremost, I just want to be completely transparent and clear with you. These are sponsored episodes. So what that means is, the guest he has mentioned in the past one is launching a course in which the topics that we are talking about today on the show are also covered in the course. And because of that, and because of this is sponsorship, if you decide that you want to go ahead and purchase the course, you can go ahead into our link, go to the site and do so. And upon doing which, IGM would receive an affiliate commission. That said, I also want to let you know there is a discount for a limited time, exclusive only to you guys, that's applied when clicking on that link. But also, we are not just straight up pitching the course on the show. We mentioned in the beginning, we mentioned it at the end, and then the whole time we are super focused and dialed in really deep on the subject for today. So I just want to be straightforward, upfront, and transparent. These are sponsored, but it's not going to change the value. There's no obligation. We just want you to be here, have a good time, and learn. So again, thanks for being such great listeners. Now let's get to the show. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Masterclass series on Indie Game Movement, where we're going to be talking about the importance of player engagement. So today we're going to explore why player engagement is crucial for the success of indie games. We sit down with our guest who shares their approach to creating games that capture and sustain player interest. And we're going to uncover the fundamental elements of engagement, discuss the role of player motivations, and learn how to measure and adapt strategies to keep players invested. So if you're looking to understand what makes players connect with your game and how to foster that connection, then this one is for you. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back again today with Patrick Rose. Patrick, thank you again for being here today. I'm really excited to get into our conversation for today.
Me too. I'm also happy to return. Let's talk.
Awesome. So again, Patrick Rose here, folks, is, helping us dive into how to create irresistible games. It's a part of this, masterclass series that we're doing here on the podcast. And, if you haven't had a chance yet, you don't need to go back to listen, but highly recommend that you go back to the first episode we had with him, which was not the original. He was a previous guest on the show, but as part of the masterclass series, go back to the previous one, overcoming the challenges of hooking your players. But now we're here to talk a little bit more of the importance of player engagement. But again, real quick, for maybe people coming in for the first time, quick brief introduction about your past history in games, and then we'll just get right into the conversation, because I know we got a lot of more digging and diving deeper into these topics that we got to do. So Patrick, take it away.
Right. I've been starting in the games industry about more than a decade ago. I was working on super successful free-to-play titles, games that made more than $300,000 a day. I've been working on big brands, for example, with companies like Bandai Namco, Elden Ring, Tekken, Dragon Ball. All these games I used to love myself, and I was so happy that I was eventually able to work with them. And now, for the past 5 years, I am working as a free consultant, and I'm helping clients all around the globe. I'm making successful games, focusing a lot on user psychology, monetization, retention, engagement, and generally making more game sales.
Awesome. And, in light of all that, again, you talk about how you like to share what you like to help others clearly, but you can't help everybody. So one of the ways that you're trying to do that is to, have this course. This is a big reason why we're here today, because a lot of the topics we are covering are related to your course. So, and I at this point in time, when the podcast goes live, you should have already released or very shortly will release that course. And again, please, if you could just give us a few sentences about what that course entails.
Oh, yes. So it took me several months to work on this thing. And the idea was born just from the fact that I realized as you said, I cannot really help everyone out there. And especially like the studios that need it the most, the indie studios, they don't have the money for consultants, obviously. So this course is kind of the most affordable thing, the most affordable package I can create, where I still put in a lot of knowledge of the past 10 years of game research, game analysis, and making successful games. And well, that's what I hope is going to be useful for a lot of people out there. And it's really like I put a lot of effort into it. I can't wait to hear the feedback from everyone.
Yeah, and folks, this isn't just another course. This is something that is packed with tons of value, and you're going to get a quick sense of that too, because the level and depth that we're going to go into today's discussion is just something that we've never really done on the podcast before. Just never really had the opportunity to, and thankfully Patrick has given us his time so we can do that. So again, as I shared earlier, today we're going to be talking about the importance of player engagement. And for those of you who did listen to the past episode, you might, I mean, it's your opinion, but you may have thought we dove in pretty deep. Well, now we're going even further because, this is so important. We're all trying to figure out what's the best way to engage with players, where to start. Maybe we're thinking at it more on just strictly from the marketing perspective with socials, but here's the thing. We got to go deeper. So to do that, we're going to kick things off with this. I mean, Patrick, player engagement, it's become a buzzword in the industry, basically what I was just calling out to a moment ago, but it's often misunderstood. So in your experience, how do you define what player engagement is beyond just keeping players interested, and why does this matter so much? Why do we need to focus on this?
Right. What you asked a good question. What is engagement even? What is that even? Like, where does it come from? So on. Would the players themselves say, "Oh, this game has a lot of player engagement"? No. What would they usually say? Andrew, what do you think? What would they say? This game.
I don't know. Like it's fun. It's a great experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's the thing. Of course, people say this is fun. So when we say player engagement, we basically mean fun. It just sounds more professional. It sounds nicer, right? When we use the term in the company. And so engagement is fun, and it leads to retention and also potentially monetization, because then people are more eager to pay. So this is why this is one of the big success pillars of, well, game success, right? So right next to monetization, accessibility, and user acquisition, as I like to say. And engagement is fun. But what is fun even? So we know quite a lot about how the brain works and how fun is created these days. And this is what I focus on a lot, actually. I cleared that question in my course. I resolved that question in my course. What is fun? How does it lead to engagement? Where is it even coming from? What is the nature behind fun? Why do we play games at all? You need to understand these things first. And web psychology has actually a pretty clear answer on this. Fun or engagement is all based in motivation, intrinsic motivation to be precise, opposing to extrinsic motivation. That is also something really, really important. A lot of game designers didn't quite understand yet, and therefore they break their games, they break their game economies without even realizing, because they confuse extrinsic motivation with intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is what I focus on in my course, in my work, in my design work as well, and in my consultancy work. I focus on that, what is really fun or passion. Sometimes we also call it immersion or engagement. That is all eventually intrinsic motivation.
Now, I have a quick question on that. I mean, you clearly define what intrinsic motivation is. What is the opposite? What is extrinsic motivation, or how do you think others may interpret what that is, and maybe as the same thing, or is it more of just a focus on that?
Sorry, you mean what is extrinsic
Yes,
motivation?
yes.
Okay. So extrinsic motivation is basically incentivized by something like rewards, money, or in games it is usually, well, some kind of points, some kind of currency you get. The prizes, that could also be the daily login bonus, is a very typical feature that focuses a lot on rewarding players for coming back on a daily basis. In real life, it's money that you get for your job. It is grades you get at school. And that works. Motivation is motivation, means it draws us, it like pushes us to do something, right? However, there is a big difference here anyways, because the intrinsic motivation is the one we have just from ourselves. It's in us, it's in all of us. Without intrinsic motivation, we wouldn't even get out of bed in the morning. But we do that, even though nobody tells us to do that. Nobody gives us money for doing so. These kind of things are intrinsic motivation. In opposing to that, the extrinsic factors, again, they also motivate, but we're going pretty deep already, actually, because I just want to mention it very, very briefly for now. Maybe we have more time to dig even deeper later. But there's one thing that is called the over-justification effect. You give people money for something they previously just did by themselves from their intrinsic motivation. And as soon as you start giving them money, they will focus too much on that money aspect, on that extrinsic reward and the incentive. And that potentially undermines the intrinsic motivation. And the over-justification effect says that this intrinsic motivation doesn't really return. It might entirely disappear. And that means things like passion and fun disappear. Engagement, natural engagement disappears because you gave people an extrinsic incentive. And in games, we do that way, way, way too much these days, especially in free-to-play and service games, but I also see it a lot in premium games. And that undermines the long-term retention, the long-term engagement for a game, for a brand. And we don't even realize that we're doing this because in the KPIs, it looks good. In the performance indicators, in the metrics, it looks good at first because it is motivation and you get people to come back on a daily basis with a daily login bonus. But at some point, you might hear them say something like, well, I only keep playing that game to pick up my daily login bonus on a daily basis, and then I don't do much more anymore. And that is not the type of player you want to have. You want to have extremely engaged players. And therefore, you need to focus on intrinsic motivation rather than on extrinsic incentives.
Yeah, no, I love that, and thank you for going further and defining the difference because again, I could easily see how people can confuse these things. I mean, we look at incentives and all these actions as key indicators in terms of success or momentum or however we want to define these things, but then we may forget or not even realize at a deeper level, and let's face it, folks, what Patrick just said, it can be probably hard to gauge too. And then we're finding all these other like symptoms and trying to use that as the root cause of it, but we don't even know because we're not getting to that deeper level. So as we, get deeper, as we explore more, I mean, I'm curious, like, why don't, what are some of the like these foundations of engagement and like specifically, I mean, you've worked on many projects aimed at creating these engaging experience, these intrinsic experiences. What do you believe are kind of the fundamental elements that lead to true player engagement? I'll put that in quotations. And how can developers identify them in their own games? Because let's face it, some of us where we're at in our development, we might not be able to make too many shifts or whatever. So what are these true fundamental elements, and are there some ways that people can perhaps identify them in their own games?
Yeah, right. So as mentioned, I focus on intrinsic motivation. I try to ignore the extrinsic incentives as much as possible. And when we look at intrinsic motivation, we have different models, different theories, but there is one which sticks out quite a lot and is used already in a lot of different industries, but still up to this day, not so much in the games industry for any reason, because it's so important for games. And that model is called the self-determination theory by Ryan and Diti, and that one exists already since they talked about it the first time in the 70s. I think it was 1977 or something like this. So it's out there for a while already. And other industries started picking up. I think the automobile industry started picking up on that model in the 2000s, something like that. And it became really, really useful for a lot of industries. Now it's time that we finally use it more in the games industry as well. It should actually be known by every game designer out there, in my opinion. And the three factors of that self-determination theory, the three main factors of intrinsic human motivation, are autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And that sounds a little bit cryptic. Allow me to explain very, very briefly. I won't go too deep here now. This is also why we have the course eventually. I talk about more than an hour about each of these three factors in the course, because it's so important to really understand what's going on there, also what's going on in the brain. This is a macro theory. We don't talk about neuroscience now, but the macro theory is totally enough to do great game design. And autonomy is basically significant decision making. We want to make our own decisions. We always want to have the feel that we're making our own decisions and no one tells us what to do, unless we are convinced that the thing someone else tells us to do is the exact right thing to do. But then it's still our own decision to follow that decision, that opinion. And so significant decision making in games, super, super important. We see that in games like Until Dawn or Mass Effect, maybe, where you have to make a lot of decisions which are going to be really impactful within the game. If these decisions are not impactful, you're not autonomous. You're not feeling autonomous. If you realize your decisions don't matter, the game is boring. If you, on the other hand, realize your decisions matter a lot, your game is exciting. It's not only these type of games where you have to like give an answer and then something happens. It's also, for example, card battle games where you have to put together your deck, strategizing, thinking and planning about how to put things together. A lot of important decision making, right? So the second factor, relatedness, is basically socializing, at least if we look back in nature, in human nature. It is socializing. This is where it's coming from. In games and other media, however, this is also story and narrative, because story and narrative always goes through characters in the game. If there's a game without any characters or a movie without characters, not even like some kind of animals or something you can relate to, no matter what the story is, you won't care. We care about stories because it tells us something about people, the background of people, and what's happening to these people. That is relatedness, that is socializing, and that was something really, really important in our past. And this is why our brain is trained to still react on these things and suck it all in, all these stories and narratives. So relatedness is not only actual socializing, it is also kind of artificial socializing with characters that are not real and their background stories and plots and games. And then we have a third factor, and that is the competence factor. And that is actually, you could say, the most original factor if it comes to games. The first type of games we had were focusing all on competence. Competence means we want to learn, we want to improve, we want to be in the flow as well. This is where the flow principle can be used to. That the flow principle is another model from another person, but it works really well with the competence factor of self-determination theory. Flow means if something is too difficult, we are frustrated. If something is too easy, we are bored. If something is just right, then this is where we keep playing, keep doing whatever we're doing. That is the flow. We have all heard about it. Many people think, game designers often think the flow is the most important thing. But as I just said, the flow is only the competence factor of self-determination theory. There is still autonomy and relatedness. So if you only focus on the flow, that is a great thing. You have a great flow in your game, but you will miss out on two other very important psychological factors. So, and therefore it's so important to understand the full spectrum and not just focus on flow, or even worse, focus on Bartle or Quantic Foundry's model. Two other models, which I'm not convinced of because they are not human-centered. they're focusing on games, and they're actually focusing on very specific games. They don't look at humans, they look at products. And therefore, we will never understand the full spectrum of the potential player. And now I already jumped into the next topic, but I didn't mean to. But yeah, these three factors are intrinsic motivation. You need to understand these three factors if you want to have great user engagement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because as you were saying that, I was like, oh, and I'm glad you called out to this because Bartle's player types came to mind. But again, and this is something I've recognized too, and I'm glad you called out to it. It's really looking at it from just the player perspective, the game, let's say behaviors, as opposed to the more internal. There's definitely some relation there, but it is different. We're talking about much deeper things in terms of understanding, the players on that level, and just again, these are all intrinsic. They all relate to each other, and to get to that really amazing experience, it's important to be mindful of these things. And I'm sure people then, when they're hearing this, they could probably start getting ideas or seeing this in their own projects in terms of, okay, yeah, maybe I'm doing this well or not. And folks, we get it. You got to work within your means too. You can't check off every single box possible. If we like, no one has unlimited resources, right? But still, like, understanding these things, and now that we have a little bit clearer understanding, I mean, when it comes to, let's say, this understanding of engagement and understanding of player motivation, and knowing that every player, because we're definitely simplifying things here with those three pillars. Each player is driven by different motivations, and you talked about some of them, but let's say there's other ones like mastery or even exploration and things like that. So, like, when it comes to those types of things, especially as they relate to other mechanics or aspects of the game, how do you approach understanding and tapping into these motivations in your work, especially with these different mechanics and other elements that are consists of whatever genre we're happen to be creating?
So that is also a really interesting thing. We often like to believe that some people are like this, some people are like that, they have different motivations. But actually, from a motivational viewpoint, we have all the same motivations. Our brains work very, very similar to each other. We are much more similar to each other than we want to believe. And these three factors count for every person there. No matter if you're introvert or extrovert, relatedness factor, socializing is something really, really important for you. If you don't have that in your life, you will get very frustrated. But the difference is our current life situation. Meaning, maybe right now I do a lot with my friends. I have a lot of people around me. I work with a lot of people every day. I have a lot of relatedness. I feel like people care for me. I care for them. So then I don't feel the necessity to also have that in a game. So maybe that is not the most important factor for me now to play a game. But maybe in a year, maybe I lose my job, I don't have friends anymore for any reason, and all that stuff. So the socializing, I really miss it. And then suddenly, the game I didn't like last year is the exact right game for me right now. So this is also a thing we need to understand. Humans are more fluid. We're not that one thing, and we will remain like that forever. However, we learn to like certain games because at some point in our life, these specific type of games were able to satisfy our needs at that time in our lives, and we remember that. For example, I love Final Fantasy, and I will always remember that I like these type of games, and it's still in my mind. I still love Final Fantasy, the original ones, but these days when I play them, I don't feel the same passion. It doesn't give me the same thing. It doesn't. I used to love JRPGs overall. I played all of them when I was a teenager. These days, I still think I should like the JRPGs. They are one of my favorite genres. But still, I don't feel the urge to play them anymore that much. Why is that? Because my life has changed. And that is the interesting thing. I would still feel the impulse to purchase these games because they look just like the thing I used to like. But if it comes to a free-to-play game, for example, they would not be that engaging for me anymore. They wouldn't keep me in the game. So that is a little bit the difference between a premium strategy and a free-to-play strategy. Free-to-play has to actually focus on the true engagement, while premium games just sometimes only have to react on these kind of impulses, maybe good childhood memories and so on, and the marketing campaign can make use of that. However, that was a little bit, again, outside of the original topic. So the point here is that we are beings that keep changing and are very, very complex. You can nevertheless now design your game in a way that it focuses on one of these three motivation factors or combines them all very well. And then you also have your marketing side, and it's on you what you show on the marketing side in your trailers. You can show the things that targets competence people, or people who now at this moment in their lives would like to play a competence-driven game. You can focus your trailers on people who need relatedness right now in their lives, and you can focus on autonomy people who maybe don't get enough significant decision-making in their lives. They don't feel important enough, so you give it to them in a game. And this is how you can control your products and also your marketing campaigns, targeting these different motivation factors. Now, actually, you ask a different question. And it took me a very long time to get there.
Yes,
the question
yes.
originally was that you want to know
Making
now,
that connection.
making the connection, understanding what your audience wants. Nevertheless, even though people are changing, your audience still is a specific audience you kept targeting because your products always went into that specific direction to a degree, at least. That's all. So you still have that audience that is maybe rather competence-driven or relatedness-driven when you make a lot of narrative games or something. If you ask questions now, and I have that a lot, big publishers love to do these surveys on what kind of games do you like, what kind of features do you like? And then they answer, the community answers to your players answer to you what they want, what they like. The interpretation of these things is really, really important. And asking the right questions is also so important. And now, in the last episode, we talked about exploration features. And when you ask them, do you like exploration, for example, and they say yes, you still don't know why. Now you will, as a big publisher, you would say, hey, dear studios, please put exploration in your game. And then the studios are like, yeah, okay, all right, we put exploration in the game, but the exploration is meaningless. There's no autonomy in it, or there's no competence in it. The thing that the players actually like about exploration, the studios might go into the wrong direction now, creating an exploration feature that doesn't tackle the actual motivation behind it. They do a bad job with that. The game is not fun to that audience. And the publisher says, dear studio, you didn't do a very good job. You're all fired now. And that happens a lot. Because initially, the publisher asked the wrong questions. They shouldn't ask, do you like exploration? Or what feature do you like? And they say exploration. They should ask, why do you like exploration? What do you like about it? And that is so important. And then you dig deeper. And a person who's a specialist in psychology, like me, I could interpret these answers. When they, for example, say, I like exploration because I can make my own important decisions to go here and there, and it will make a difference depending on what I visit first. It will change the course of everything in the game. Then I know, okay, this is entirely autonomy driven. Meaning, we don't necessarily even need exploration in our game. We just need an autonomy-driven game. And that is much more important than just putting some kind of exploration in our game.
Yeah, because that's hours, that's resources, that's money, right? To find out that, hey, it may not even land. And you know what?
Yeah.
What you just concluded there too, I want to go back. I loved the analogy you provided where, because the way I see it is there's kind of two segments here, right? There's the one that all humans kind of act in very similar ways, whether we believe it or not. But it's the impact that our life experiences have had and shaped us and molded us into who we are today. But there's still characteristics that we're always going to have, whether we recognize them or not. And with you calling it, like, I love the survey example and how sometimes we take this information and take it for verbatim. And let's just say if someone were to give, and I loved it too, because that's me. I love JRPGs. I'll always identify as I am a RPG player, but I have also identified that I think more now than ever, I'm more of a relaxed, cozy game type player, even though it's sometimes my true inner gamer is having a hard time admitting that because I always identified with a JRPG and such. Same exact reasons. I thought you were speaking on behalf of me for a moment. Regardless, the point here is, with those changes, if we were to give you a survey, if it said, "Do you like RPGs?" Right? What
Right.
what most likely would you check off that box and say yes, and like, or maybe you might be more mindful, but my point here is those types of situations can change, and we're not really accounting for these deeper level types of things that we should be considering, because like you said, those motivations and everything else are so important, especially in how we're connecting. So lots of cool stuff there. I absolutely love that. you know in creating these, engaging experiences, there's, lots of challenges associated with this. And I know people can probably struggle a lot trying to do this too. So, with everything you shared up to this point, like, what would you say are some common pitfalls, to watch out for as we're trying to connect with this motivation, with engagement and everything? Because I'm sure it's not really all that easy, even if we have like such deeper context to what you shared.
Yeah, right. It's absolutely not easy. You really need to learn what these things mean. And actually, we have to relearn it. We have a little bit of the problem that our society is very extrinsic incentive focused. Everything we do, we usually do for money or for school grades or anything like this. Little piece of my life story, I don't have that focus anymore. I don't focus on money. I also like to say I don't work for money. And that doesn't mean I work for free, but there is a goal that is more important. And that, to me, because I understand these three factors. To me, I understand significant decision making. Autonomy is really, really important to me. I love traveling. I'm in South Korea right now to visit my friends here. I'm going to stay here for 3 months. And that's what I like. I like to have the possibility to go wherever I want at any time. If my friends in the other end of the world are having their marriage, I want to be able to just go there. That is important decision making for me, for example. This autonomy is my main goal. And this is what we need to understand. Money doesn't make us happy in life, but these overlying, these bigger goals make us happy. These three factors make us happy, basically. And this is also how we need to design our games. So the pitfall here, again, and I mentioned that quite a lot before, is focusing too much on extrinsic motivation, extrinsic incentives. I see this so much these days in games. Don't focus too much on giving them bigger, better numbers, rewards, all these things. Focus on, and a game that does that really well is the recent Zelda titles, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. Focus on intrinsic motivation. These games don't reward you with a lot of money all the time or stuff, but you do a lot of things, a lot of exploration. You do that intrinsically because it's interesting. You really want to see what's that thing there in the bag, and you want to figure out what that is. You want to learn what that is. That is a competence factor, learning, understanding how things work and what that is. And that is the important thing. Don't fall into the pitfall of focusing too much on extrinsic incentives. There's one second thing. A big pitfall is that we believe engagement, great, awesome features is the most important thing to stand out and to be successful. But there is accessibility too. If no matter how engaging your game is, how great your features are, how awesome everything is, and what kind of potential there would be for game fun, if your audience doesn't have access to this motivation, to this engagement, to the fun of your game, then they will never play it. What do I mean by that? Every single level. You put like a $40 or $60 or these days even $70 or $80 for some games, price tag on your game, accessibility is low, a lot of people won't buy it, won't even try at all. And then it's technical requirements. It is also the graphic style, the theme. Is it understandable? This is also why some games from China, for example, have difficulties to sell in the West and vice versa because we don't understand these themes. It's not accessible to us. We never got it. But if we would know what that is, maybe it would be much more interesting for us, and we would directly get it and then play it and understand this is going to be really engaging for me. And then also something like tutorials in the actual game. You have to fight your way through text boxes, all that kind of stuff. This is where people drop off early on. It's just not accessible. The game takes too long to learn, too long to understand. It's not accessible. That doesn't mean you have to make a casual game, because Zelda Breath of the Wild, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, they are not casual games. You can play them, you can enjoy them as a hardcore gamer, and they can be really, really difficult too, depending on how you play them. But they are extremely accessible. You take your Switch, you start your Switch, it starts right away because it was in sleep mode. I'm right in the game. I play. Within only 5 or 10 minutes, I can make some progress. Even though I'm owning a company and I have 2 kids at home, I can still enjoy a little bit of Zelda. That is accessibility. This is so important. That is the other pitfall. Don't only think in motivation and engaging features. Think also in accessibility from the beginning of your design process.
Absolutely love it. I mean, and now with like focusing on accessibility and all these other things. I mean, when it comes to engagement, we know it's not just about the hook, because I mean that helps. We need it, and that's what's going to get people in, and it could maintain them a bit. But it's not all about that. So, for that sustaining interest and working towards that, especially over time, long periods of time. And, maybe Zelda's a perfect example of that, at least the titles that you mentioned. What are some ways, developers can keep players invested beyond those first few hours of gameplay? Because that's a key factor too. We're always talking about what's the median playtime for games and such. And these are very important factors, but what keeps them?
Right. And the type of games that can keep people the best are usually service games, free-to-play games, right? And they usually manage that with a very smooth learning curve. It starts very simple with engaging core gameplay often these days, which is much better these days than it was like five years ago. And then you have engagement in the first seconds. But they will shift their focus much more, that step by step, they will shift their focus to like more a cognitive side. Meaning in the beginning, we like action, gameplay, this kind of hook, and something that feels fun right away in the first seconds. So we played a little bit longer, but after 2, 3, 4 days, we want to see that this, maybe even on day 1, we want to see that this game also has a little bit of thinking and planning, and my strategy also matters. And this is something truly important. And we see that in real world scenarios as well. You start working for a company as an intern. Your first type of jobs is like taking out the trash, maybe taking some phone calls, all these kind of things. Simple stuff. It doesn't feel simple in the beginning. It's difficult, but we learn to master that. We feel quite good about it then when we mastered it. And then we start feeling after some time in that company, now I would like to do something that's a little bit more difficult. I think I got this now. Give me something with more of a challenge. So it becomes more difficult, obviously. And then at some point, we want to become, maybe after a few years, a manager, someone with leading and well, something more cognitive. Not just something we do with our hands, but something more cognitive, and we let other people do the stuff with our hands. Same stuff happens with games. You start with the sensory motor type of gameplay and shift it over to the cognition part. And while you're doing that, you focus on these 3 factors: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Competence meaning the game needs to become gradually more difficult, like in the company. Relatedness means you need to, well, engage, get the player engaged with other people, maybe if you have a multiplayer game, or with the story and narrative and the characters in the game. Just like in the company, often you hear people say, employees are loyal to a company because of other people, of their bosses, for example, and so on. It is a really important point. And it's the same thing in games. You can keep people engaged with the relatedness factor. And the third factor, autonomy, give them more and more and more significant decision-making, more to strategize about, and more to be creative about maybe as well. And if you gradually increase this, also going from the sensory motor side, the more twitch kind of gameplay, over to the cognition and planning side, focusing on these three factors, then this is how you create a huge meta engagement potential.
And as you were saying those two, I love how you were aligning it with the example of, work or whatever, because again, it goes back to your point about calling out like, hey, look, these are all things that all humans, basically, all people are part of. And I think that alignment, hopefully gives a clearer perspective of how much those three core elements are so important in focusing, in addition to the other segment, what we probably associate with more marketing related and things like that, or even extrinsic type elements with the game and things like that. So absolutely love that. But in saying that, and loving how you outline that progression and how these things are, related to each other and work so well with each other, I assume that measuring this type of stuff can be difficult, and especially, adapting to maybe changes that might be happening. So, before we close here, I mean, how do you recommend developers measure this? Whether their game is truly engaging, and what they should do, when the numbers indicate otherwise. I mean, are there ways to track this or to tell if these things are happening, and if they are, or if they stop or keep going in the right direction? How can we tell?
Yeah, that is something I see a lot at universities, game design universities. They teach about game design, and then they don't really talk about the business side of things. What does the game design actually need to target? When you work in a company, your designs need to target certain metrics, certain KPIs. And of course, we can measure them. Most people working in the games industry for a while, they know all that stuff. It's pretty straightforward, but still there's a lot of people out there, especially industries, that are not so aware of these things maybe. And for engagement, especially in free-to-play and service games, you usually would measure something like day 1 retention, day 7 retention, day 30 retention for longer term engagement. And then you have other special kind of factor like metrics like the stickiness factor, like the DAU-MAU ratio, which is the daily active users versus the monthly active users ratio, which makes you understand how often do they come back in a month. And you want to have that number like as positive as possible, obviously. And these are very typical engagement KPIs. If it comes to premium games, the whole thing is a little bit different depending on what kind of premium games. There's also service premium games, obviously, that's again very similar. But if it's like, for example, that typical single player classic type of game, then you want to measure much more on the community side. How engaged are they? You also want to see like how many hours is your game played, how many % of your game is played by the users. That is obviously something you can determine the engagement with, but also on the community side, like how is your game performing on YouTube, for example? How is it picked up by people? How many people are watching it? How many people are following it? And how many comments are written? So these are also all indicators on how engaged your players are, specifically for premium games in this matter, which is a little bit more fluffy than the very nice free-to-play approach where you can directly see in your data backend if you have implemented it, which can be a technical challenge. But if you have implemented it, then you can see it really, really nicely exactly what the people are doing and everything. And this is extremely important to determine what to do with your game design and how to shape your game design. And just to go back to that student thing, students need to learn that early on, in my opinion. They need to understand that they can't just design anything. I mean, it's awesome if they have the opportunity to just make art and make whatever they want without having to think about product success. That is great. But in most situations, that is not the case. They will have to focus on company metrics. And therefore, they will also have to design their games in a way that the retention metrics, monetization metrics are good. So students should also learn this early on. And it's sad that we don't have more of this knowledge in schools and game design schools going on yet.
Yeah, but I mean, at least now we're getting that word out in terms of understanding the importance of these things, of of the business practices that are essential, and so much more. How what really is, true engagement, and getting to that deeper level or deeper understanding of what engagement is beyond just simply, marketing talk with people liking a social media post, right? Because there's so much more to it than that. So, Patrick, as we close here, because I know we're definitely coming on time, you know, of what we talked about, really getting into like a deep conversation about, the most important aspects of player engagement. What would you say is a core principle you want people to take away about player engagement, about our conversation today? And maybe like some quick ideas on how they can start implementing it today.
Okay. I don't want to repeat myself too much talking about intrinsic motivation, avoiding that the extrinsic incentives destroy the intrinsic motivation and the fun of your game. And these three factors, all important stuff. That would be my answer if I hadn't said these things yet. But I give you an idea on how you can exercise that stuff. At first, you should read about it or buy my course, and I will teach you right away as good as I can in that course. And then, if you have at least a rough understanding of what these three factors, autonomy, competence, and relatedness, actually mean, try to implement that in any feature you can think of, just as an exercise. Or maybe you are just right now working on a particular feature in your game. Think of these three factors. Think about how you can combine them. I didn't mention that yet. If you combine them, you will have great synergies, by the way, that will make it even much more powerful. And we see that in all the most successful games out there of all times, that these games usually are really, really good at combining these three features, these three factors. And now I got one challenge for you. And it's a bit similar to one of the exercises I also have in my course. The challenge is take a jumping feature. So just like jumping, like in Super Mario or anything like this, right? And now think of the three factors as soon as you understood what they actually mean: significant decision-making and autonomy, relatedness, caring and interacting with other individuals, and the competence factor, meaning, well, basically learning, understanding, improving. So these three factors, and think about how you can create a jumping feature has all these three factors in it combined. And that sounds crazy at first, but I did this exercise with a lot of people, and it's a little bit difficult at first to think about how can you add relatedness to a jumping feature, but believe me, it is possible.
I love that challenge. And folks, please take up Patrick on that, because that's a good one. And it's funny, as you said that, and I could be completely wrong, but the first thing that popped into mind, maybe as an example for this challenge, was Skyrim. Because the jumping, it's nothing special about that jump, but I can scale the crap out of mountains pretty quickly,
Mm.
even though it might be a challenge and kind of pointless. And sometimes when people are walking by are like, what are you doing? But
Yeah.
it at least gives that autonomy, that agency. It still gives me a flow. It gives me like a sense of accomplishment. There's so many things that jump feature allows me to do, and maybe obviously partially in design of some of the terrain, but that alone is just one. I don't know, it might not be the best example, but that's what came to mind to me in terms of how that, like, maybe at least for me, checked off all those boxes in that game. So anyways, it just felt like a share.
Do we have enough time that I give another very tiny example?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. Super Mario. Let's say Mario 64, for example, or one of the 3D Marios, later 3D Marios. The jumping mechanic, especially I remember back in Mario 64, that one was pretty tricky to figure out how it works. Like, how is the behavior? How does the physics works? There's even, I think, 2 or 3 different types of jumps you can do in that game.
Yes.
And you even have that triple jump with a good timing and so on, right? That needs practice. You keep improving, and at some point you feel like a king or a queen or anything in between or outside of that to perform these jumps just perfectly, to overcome all the challenges, speed running eventually even, and so on. And even if you play through the entire game, it doesn't mean you have really truly mastered this jumping mechanic. Competence, On the relatedness side, just the noises Mario makes when jumping, these yoo-hoo and so on, right? Charles Martinet is the speaker. I met him once, by the way, the voice actor for Mario, the original one. And this is relatedness. This connects us to Mario. You can feel the emotions in Mario, basically. And when you jump into a wall and hit it and fall back, you feel the pain because Mario is also making a noise like this. Relatedness. And the third thing, the autonomy, there's a lot of micro decisions you're making in these moments which have significant impact on, well, what happens next, because it's a platformer. You do the wrong jump, you don't perform it correctly, you fall down all the way. That is a lot of impact on a micro decision, right? So that is one example. Oh my God. One other, sorry for that. I'm really stretching this now, but one other very artful example, think of Journey. Have you played Journey?
I have not.
Play Journey. Everyone listening to this, play Journey. It's only like 2 or 3 hours long. It's a piece of art. The jumping mechanic works in a way you can't really jump. You can only fly when you collect some energy, and only for a very short moment. However, when there's another character in the game, and there's a little bit of a spoiler, though I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but I just do it now, because I do it in my course as well. So the other, if you don't want to hear that spoiler, then mute me for a few seconds. So when there is another character coming in, which is actually another player, the game doesn't tell you, but it's another player you're playing with, and you're close to that other player, then you refill your energy. Like both of you actually have infinite energy then. Just being close to another person gives you more energy, which is also a little bit of a life lesson, I think. And then you can fly infinitely for as long as you're close to another person. That is relatedness in your jumping feature. And it's a piece of art.
I love those examples. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate you sharing those, because I now, when you, especially with the Mario one, I was like, okay, that is clearly like hitting all those right marks and everything else. So very good one. So again, folks, that challenge, look at your jump feature, especially if you have one, and how can you implement those 3 things? I love it. I love that call to action there, Patrick. Well, again, we're on time, and this was great. We went so deep into this, and hopefully people like really see a lot of value here. But hey, folks, if you want to learn more, if you want to dig deeper and save yourself the time for maybe learning about these things in various different ways or capacities, again, the course is available, How to Create Irresistible Games. Patrick, as you said, what we discussed today, you go even deeper in the course. Big, huge section dedicated to that and more. And again, we have an exclusive offer for just listeners of IGM. Go to the show notes, click on the link, and that should be automatically applied. And yeah, take advantage of this if you think it is something that you could really help at your games. I mean, and Patrick, I really can't thank you enough for sharing this level of insight and depth here, because I mean, look, let's face it, we don't talk about these things enough. And I think we're starting to really see the importance that they can have on our games, not just from, a commercial success standpoint, but also from, I would say, a personal, the motivation, the passion behind what we do. And now it has more meaning and purpose, that we know that we're, better connecting with players and in a way that they're engaged and they're having fun.
Absolutely. Just like what you're saying, we learn about ourselves as well. And that is a nice thing. When we play, no matter if just playing around or play games, and really we try to understand why we're doing things, we learn so much about ourselves and our lives. Games have been teaching me so much about myself. And yeah, I love talking about these things. Maybe you hear that in my energy today. But yeah, it's just a lot of fun for me being here. So thank you so much for inviting me to this.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.